Good evening, and welcome to the residence of the British Ambassador in Luxembourg. I'm David Clark. I'm President of the British-Luxembourg Society, and I'm here to welcome you, both those of you who are attending in person and those of you attending online, to this event, which is sponsored by the British-Luxembourg Society, the Oxford University Society of Luxembourg, the Cambridge Society of Luxembourg, and the LSE Society of Luxembourg. And it's a first-time event for all the four societies to join forces. And it's wonderful to have three world-class universities represented here. And just very quickly, a little bit about the British-Luxembourg Society. We were founded in 1947. We were the younger brother of the Luxembourg Society, which was founded in London in 1942. So we have a long history and tradition in Luxembourg. But before I go on, I think I'll hand over to the British Ambassador, John Marshall, who would like to say a word of welcome.
Thank you very much, David, and I hope you and Catherine, our speaker, will forgive me if I take advantage of having the floor just to say four brief things. First of all, really, is to echo David's welcome to you all, both those of you in the room and those of you participating online. It's particularly a pleasure to be able to welcome some of you in person. For obvious reasons, we haven't been having quite as many events recently as we're used to, and the events that we have been having have been very different events. I think I can recognise most of you through your masks, but that is one of the challenges that events nowadays present. But it's very exciting to have this first sort of hybrid event here at the residence. The second thing I wanted to say, still on COVID, is that I hope you and your families have been keeping safe and well during this pandemic. And I think we have to all accept that we are in this for the long haul. So I hope you and your families continue to remain well and continue to adapt to the restrictions under which we're all living. As I say, I think things will stay as they are for a while, and I'm afraid that probably does include the quarantine arrangements in force for those in Luxembourg wishing to travel to the UK. The third thing I wanted to say very briefly about our relationship with Europe, big week this week. I won't say anything about the ongoing negotiations. You can see how those are unfolding over the next few days. But I do want to urge all of you who are UK nationals and who are required to exchange your residency card to do so. The system operated by the Luxembourg government has been open for application since the 1st of July. It's a very smooth system. Many people have already successfully obtained a new residence card. The scheme is open until the end of June next year, but there really is no advantage in waiting and every advantage in getting your application in early. So please do apply if you need to. And for those of you who don't, perhaps because you're not British, please do encourage your British friends to do so. And finally, a little bit of a plug. During the COVID times, I have been making good use of my evenings to finalise the next version of our Lux UK Links book, which is a celebration of the links between Luxembourg and UK. It's currently at the printers. We will be launching it towards the end of October. I'm very excited about it. I think it's a great publication, and hopefully you will like it too once you eventually can get your hands on it at the bookshops. So amidst all the doom and gloom of the pandemic, that's one sort of bright spot that I've been working on. I hope others can look forward to. So thank you very much. Thank you very much, Catherine, for what you're about to do. And I will leave David to formally introduce you.
Thank you, John. It's a great pleasure to introduce Professor Catherine Léglu. She is a dual French-British national, brought up in Liverpool and educated at Cambridge University, where she studied medieval French. Most recently, before coming to Luxembourg, I think she was head of the Department of Modern Languages at Reading University, and she is now Vice-Rector, responsible for academic studies at the University of Luxembourg. And this event, as you know, is all about the University of Luxembourg. It's one of the great innovations of modern times in Luxembourg, and has done wonderful things to improve the intellectual environment of the city and the country. So I think that is enough. I think I'll leave it now for Catherine to tell us about the university. Catherine Léglu.
Thank you very much. And I would like to say good evening and thank you for making it through the rain and despite having to wear masks. And also, of course, good evening to everybody who's watching this remotely. I'm very, very honoured and very pleased to have been invited to address everybody today. I've been at the University of Luxembourg for a year, which makes me a bit of an old timer, and therefore in many ways I'm also still discovering aspects of the university because it is a very, very exciting place. The university was founded in 2003, and what some of my colleagues often say is that it's now reached its teenage years, which often cannot be the easiest time in somebody's development, but that means that also it's well on the way to becoming an adult. And I think it's very interesting that this talk is taking place under the patronage of some of the oldest universities in Europe. And, you know, in many ways, this is a very, very different kind of institution, but also one that draws on those experiences and that knowledge that's been gathering through universities, you know, for centuries. And I hope that this very young university has a lot to contribute still, you know, in the long term. Basically, one of the most important aspects of the University of Luxembourg is its youth, and of course is its embeddedness in Luxembourg itself. It is a product of some quite risk-taking decisions made by the government in 2003. There was apparently quite a debate about whether to found a university or not. And one of the reasons why parents in particular were concerned was because in Luxembourg it was strongly believed that it was good for young Luxembourgers to go, to travel as far as possible, to find out, to learn and to experience outside Luxembourg in order to bring back their skills and their experience in the future. Creating a university was therefore potentially a step back. And one of the things that's been very important in this university has been that it contributes to the country, it develops the country, but it maintains a very, very strongly international outlook. And as you probably know, mobility is compulsory for all our students. All our students are obliged to spend at least one semester abroad at any time during their studies as a bachelor student. And in our master's programs, mobility is very often built in as well. And so rather than in some countries, including one which I recently left, where you actually had to justify mobility, actually here it's regarded as absolutely essential. And that's a very, very different aspect to how studies happen here and how they're regarded. So I'll talk first about the unique profile of Luxembourg University. The country is unique, the university reflects that profile. You may, of course, be familiar with Belleval and the fact that Belleval was created as une cité des sciences, with this focus on it being a campus. And it's therefore also a unique innovation hub. Therefore, we have an incubator, we have all sorts of other things going on there. Soon the National Archives will be moved there as well. Obviously, the whole point of the Belleval site, the whole point of the project was also an exercise in urban regeneration, to take what had been a very thriving steelworks out of the end, effectively, of that period of its industrial revolution into the next stage, the next industrial revolution, which is technology, digitization, soft skills, and so on. And it was therefore felt that a university in the site of that former industrial revolution was enormously symbolically important, that the southern part of the country, being traditionally the industrial part of the country, would reflect that by moving forwards. Our unique profile is also that it's amazingly enough quite small, and therefore it reflects that small is beautiful aspect of Luxembourg. We are still quite a small university. We have 2,000 staff, but we have just over 6,000 students. And out of those, there are actually more students doing masters than you might normally see in a standard classic university. We have about 1,700 master's students and about 900 PhD students. We also offer more master's programs than bachelor programs, and that was actually a deliberate decision, that actually the idea was that your Luxembourg national would go to another country to travel for their bachelor program and then come back and perhaps do a master's here. But also there's an element which is very important, which is that also the master's degrees attract students here, and therefore the majority of our truly international students are often to be found in the master's degree cohorts. The 14 bachelor degrees range from interdisciplinary right the way through to niche. And when I mean niche, I mean general, like law, for example, or the very recently introduced, running for the first time this year, Bachelor in Medicine. And all of our bachelor degrees reflect aspects of Luxembourg that are very important, notably that they are all bilingual and some are trilingual as well. We have 4 doctoral schools and so on. So therefore we're small, but we're actually quite busy internally. We're not devoted to a very, very small number of subjects. It's actually very broad. Our multilingual programs always have English as a component, and that maintenance of multilingualism is very important to Luxembourg and very important to the university. If you look at the universities in the greater region, the Netherlands, for example, have increasingly moved towards English-only education, and that's causing certain debates within some universities in the Netherlands. In France, it's still very much the focus on French language, but a growing use of English in some fields. And then in Germany, there's still the maintenance of German language. And obviously over the border in Belgium, Louvain-la-Neuve, for example, is a French language university. We maintain that idea of a bilingual, even a trilingual education right the way through. And that makes us different from universities in the greater region. And it also, of course, offers a certain challenge to some international students who need to acquire French and German, but then they need to acquire French and German to live here anyway. And there are some courses where Luxembourgish is spoken, notably, of course, Luxembourgish history and a master's in Luxembourgish studies as well. I've mentioned the mandatory semester abroad, part of that move outwards, that international approach, and we have multiple international agreements as well. At any given moment, there's over 600 students from this university somewhere else in the world. When I say any given moment, for the moment, this is not one of them, okay? Obviously, with COVID, we had to change our plans, but most of our students are determined to try to go abroad at some point in the future in their studies. It's only this year has been different, and we accept that and we respect that as well. We're also a member of the University of the Greater Region, which I'll talk about in a minute. So, in terms of our cooperation with UK universities, some of these have been enshrined since the beginning of the university and others are a bit more recent. About 90 of the university's staff and students are British, and that's enormously important to the international profile as well. There's a partnership to teach a master's degree in law with King's College London, and then we have agreed student exchanges with 21 universities across the UK. And as you probably know, most UK universities have had to renegotiate all of their exchange partnerships in the past 2 years. Some universities were very fast to start renegotiating, and others waited a little while. My former university was very quick, in fact, in renegotiating a lot of partnerships. We already have other research cooperations and other partnerships that are very healthily set up. Finance with Durham University, growing involvement as well with research with Imperial College London, IT security with UCL, life sciences with the Universities of Liverpool and UCL, social sciences with the University of Oxford, and law with the University of Cambridge. So those links are thriving, and those links are very, very important to us as a new university, and one with this very strong interest in developing and strengthening its international reach. So where do we fit in the things that everybody looks at, which are the rankings? The THE World University Rankings has placed us among the top 250 universities worldwide, which is great, and ranks us still number 1. I think we've slightly slipped. We may be nearer number 3 now for our international outlook. This tends to be regarded with some skepticism in some parts of Luxembourgish society, because Luxembourg is by definition international in outlook. But it's very much, as I've emphasised, the fact that everything pushes the international while maintaining the idea of a skill set for Luxembourg, bringing in increasing numbers of teachers, for example, who are trilingual, bringing in engineers who have the right skills, and so on. Number 90 in the THE rankings by subject in computer sciences, and that very much reflects the strength of digitisation and digital studies here. We're a young university. We don't have to worry about buildings that may not be equipped. The buildings were built to be equipped, so that's very, very important as well. In the young university rankings, we do quite well. Remember that one of the top-rated young universities now is Paris's Sorbonne, which as a medievalist I find interesting, considering the fact that the last time Paris Sorbonne was quite big was about 1210. So I think it's worth remembering that not every young university is young. We are, however, young. We're not a newly created institution, but actually we are, if you like, a startup. Number 12 worldwide, with some very stiff competition from some major universities. In the UK, one of the rivals on this front is Lancaster University. And if you've never even thought of Lancaster University, I'll point it out as an outlier, which is actually becoming increasingly influential in many aspects of research. Fourth among the millennial universities, as I said, it's a teenage university, it's also a millennial, set up in the 21st century, so that's very important as well. And the Nature Index has ranked it as 78th of the top 175 young universities in the global Nature Index. And that means, and by the way, to be a young university, you have to be 50 and under. So I'm no longer a young professor. Right, so what do we have now? We have our unique profile that we need to build on. One of the most essential aspects of the strengths in Luxembourg is the very, very short distance between society, industry, all the different institutions, and that's very much something that we reflect as well. There's cooperation with European institutions. Obviously, FDEF, our Faculty of Law, Economics and Finance, is actually in Kirchberg, and students will have placements and job opportunities round the corner, which is very, very important. We have cooperation with the European Court of Justice and the European Investment Bank. Also with innovative companies, cooperation with the financial centre, and so on. And we also have an extremely close cooperation with the LIs. The LIs are the Luxembourg Institutes of Research, and that was enormously important actually in the COVID crisis in the early days, because we had weekly meetings between us and the LIs, because many researchers actually share knowledge and synergies with each other, and that was a very important part of developing actually what was the advice that was given to the government in many aspects of how to manage the COVID crisis. So cooperation also with many non-academic partners, such as ministries, local governments, associations, embassies, NGOs, and so on. So it's a very, very lively set of links. Within the university, therefore, you might get this idea that everything's very multiple, it's multilingual. There are interdisciplinary subjects. We have this idea of several layers to what we do. And that's also part of our focus on interdisciplinary research. We have two cross-disciplinary themes. Cross-disciplinary theme one is health and systems biomedicine and the introduction of a bachelor in medicine. There's always been a foundation course in medicine, which actually the last group of students took their exams this summer. And now the next intake will actually hopefully stay on right the way through to bachelor. But biomedicine is extremely strong. The second cross-disciplinary theme is data modeling and simulation, enormously important, links with the LI of l'ISER and statistics, and obviously has been extremely important also in the COVID context. So you can see the interdisciplinary research in many aspects: European and international law, finance and financial innovation, what's called fintech, both in terms of the hard sciences and in terms of the soft sciences, education, contemporary and digital history, material science, and ICT security. The way that this multiplicity builds up is actually with a very, very simple core structure. We have three faculties. They're very strongly identified faculties, one of sciences, technology and now medicine, one of law, economics and finance, and one of humanities, education and social sciences. And then we have three interdisciplinary centres. The CIDUDH, which is the Centre for Digital History, SNT, which is a security and trust, but actually does things like space programs, as well as fintech, and the LCSB, which is most famous for its research into the causes of Parkinson's disease, for example. I'll talk about the finances. What you can see on this wonderful chart is actually one of the most important messages, which is that we are an almost completely publicly funded institution. The blue section is the state endowment. And that means that also we reflect a very strong aspect of Luxembourg society, which is also the intense investment in education and in the research and in the development of skills for the next generations. We're currently working on a strategy for the university for the next 20 years. And that means that we're also working on the strategy in terms of the demographic changes within Luxembourg, especially the massive growth in the younger generation, the growing younger population, who we know will eventually mean that we will have more students. And of course, we will have more young researchers as well. So our responsibility is also very closely linked to that state endowment. And we often say we have three missions: teaching, research, and service to the country. In many other universities, you might say service to society or service to the world. And of course, we do have those. We have service to the world very strongly, but actually our service to the country is also a very strong part of what we do. We are, after all, the only public university in the country. Okay, so what are our achievements? This is the bragging bit. Well, obviously, we train the experts of tomorrow, and hopefully we train them well. We've awarded more than 18,000 degrees since 2005 to 6, obviously not since 2003. They had to get started. And many others, including, and we also offer certificates, many professional certificates and many what's called formation continue, which is for professionals who work part-time on their training. We're building our research reputation, punching massively above our weight in terms of research grant capture. Over 320 million euros of external research revenues from 2010 to 2019, exceptionally high successes in some competitions. And there's about 90 approved grants since the launch of, I'm going to stop getting very technical and I apologize, the Horizon 2020 program, which, as you might guess, just came to an end. And so on. Now, the most important aspect in terms of the reputation building of this university is also publications. Who cites the University of Luxembourg and where does it get published? Crucially important for developing what we hope is going to be a very long-term reputation for the university. So publications are what are called top quartile journals, in other words, the most frequently cited journals in the field. Journals such as Nature, for example, are immensely important, and they've gone up enormously. And again, this is extremely strong. I don't want to put down any local universities in the Grande Région, because obviously they have very, very different markets and very, very different profiles, but actually we do extremely well. And I think that's one of the most important things. More than 30 publications in Nature publication group journals, which if you're in the sciences It's good. And Science magazine in the last 3 years. And 3 scientists have been named highly cited researchers in 2019. So in other words, people are talking about and citing the University of Luxembourg increasingly, which also is a sign of its strengths, very targeted recruitment of top experts in their fields, pushing those top experts in a positive direction, very successful grant capture. You get cited a lot when your findings come out. This is the way that you build a reputation, and this is the way you develop a strength. I apologise to all the people whose pictures I slightly expanded. They look normally a bit better looking than this. So we have a number of competitive, endowed and industrial chairs as well. I hasten to add that a chair here, an endowed chair, is not a professor. They're very often associate prof. But they are endowed, and they are a sign of the recognition of this university. So if we look at the first lot, they are the competition ones, the ERC, which is the European Research Council chairs. Universities I'm used to, you might be really, really lucky if you get 1 or 2. You know, here we have a bit more than 1 or 2, including one whose picture has moved. It's like he's meant to be down there. That's Paul Villemez, who you'll be familiar with, Paul, of course. He's been very, very leading in terms of talking about COVID and dealing with the response to COVID in terms of medicine in this country. Also the FNR, the Luxembourg National Research Fund, funds what are called Pearl Chairs, which is a Programme Excellence Award for research in Luxembourg, and we've been very successful in obtaining them. This is less easy than it sounds, because of course we compete with the LIs, we compete with the Luxembourg Institutes of Research, so we compete, if you like, with the pure research institutes to get this funding. And it's very important that we, as a result, as a teaching institution as well as research, we achieve that. The industrial chairs obviously attract a lot of attention. Some of them you may have come across before. There's the TDK chair, which is materials for solar cells. There's SES, obviously, which is part of our intense work in satellite communications, space mining, and so on. ArcelorMittal chair, and that's in facade engineering. You see all the chairs, we try to make them reflect the strengths of the country and the strategic directions of the country as well. And so on. So you can see all of these. There is one under recruitment. I'm not going to ask where it is at for the moment. Obviously, everything's slowed down with COVID. And a PayPal chair at the end was the most recent one when I arrived last year. There's also, actually, if I can skip back, there we go, the public chairs, who didn't get any little words on this, and I apologise to them. The public chairs are basically, we have Robert Armson, who is currently our UNESCO chair in human rights. We have 2 Jean Monnet chairs in European studies, and a shared chair in social inequality, 2 specialists in social inequality. And then there's a research chair in parliamentary studies, which is founded by La Chambre des Députés. That's Philippe Poirier, who's launching a master's in parliamentary studies this year. So that's all our chairs. Now, what's happening at another end of the spectrum, which is spin-offs and the creation by postdocs, by younger students, and also actually by some of our students of spin-offs. These are very often created nowadays through the incubator and also through a group who are very dynamic, who foster entrepreneurship in the university. You can do a master's in entrepreneurship and innovation, but also there are schemes right the way from the beginning of somebody's bachelor career to be able to get involved in what are called ideation camps. I thought the concept sounded a bit strange, but actually they're like boot camps for entrepreneurs, and they're teaching you to come up with ideas. If you're from a UK context, you all know Dragon's Den, and I've had the pleasure of being a kind of Dragon's Den type judge and telling them to, of course, I love their idea and everything else. I'm never the horrible one. And these have actually produced some very nice startups, which of course then have angel investments from various parts of the country. And this is only some of them. And there's another photograph of a cute robot, because I like the cute robots. I'm not really sure what that one does, but anyway, it's very cute. So in other words, it's not just about being established and building on its existing strengths. It's also about developing and fostering the strengths of the future. And that's immensely important. Okay. So we are a partner contributing to the country's future. We've got education of teachers, which comes up a lot in public debate, because obviously for the moment, that's a very, very live concern for the Luxembourgish government. That's both the primary sector, where there have to be trilingual primary teachers, and also the secondary sector, where we have, for example, a master's in mathematics, for example. Digital Luxembourg, HPC, new medical curriculum, and so on. Our space activities are probably the most high profile, and they're the ones I've mentioned. We also have the Master in Space Communication and Media Law, which is another interdisciplinary master. You probably often see photographs of this little recreation of a moon surface that you sometimes see. We also, of course, have a digital strategy that was put together and launched just before I arrived, and I was going to be one of the people implementing it. And then on March 16th, we implemented it completely. And so it moved from being a strategy and a plan to being the reality within which we are still living. And that's been very exciting. So therefore, now we're beginning to find out what went well, what went wrong. Very little went wrong, actually. We were ready. And also, of course, we're learning lessons and hoping to share those lessons with people who are willing to explore those lessons with us. So what are our plans? What are we cooking up? Actually, despite COVID, we still have plans, and I think the most important part of it is that they're continuing to develop. One of the biggest is the high performance computing plan, the HPC. That's about accelerating the world-class HPC technologies in Luxembourg. So there's a number of initiatives. Some of them have been slightly slowed down, others are still going. You may be aware, for example, of the upcoming Luxembourg Melusina supercomputer. What you need to know about the legendary Melusine is that not only does she occasionally turn into this amazing fish woman, but also she is a builder and a founder, and she founds and builds enormous amounts of fortresses, cities, countries, and all her children become immensely powerful. So supercomputer, that's basically what Melusine is, and well named as a result. And the implementation of the HPC Competence Centre are both scheduled for 2020, both slightly delayed, but hopefully happening, all part of the initiative of Digital Luxembourg. There is also an Institute for Advanced Studies, which is going to be deliberately based on the idea of fostering audacious projects, attracting young academics, getting them to talk, getting them to exchange ideas, and then using brainstorming meetings. It's a kind of incubator for research rather than an incubator for business, and attracting distinguished thinkers to galvanize these young academics through their brainstorms. And so this is, obviously, there are some major IAS centers across the world. I asked my colleague Jens Keisel which is the nearest example I could give you that might be relevant to a UK audience, and he actually said Clare Hall, Cambridge. In other words, an environment where it's all researchers who share ideas and have that excitement and that buzz. I think in terms of Oxford, therefore, possibly All Souls, that sense of people who are established in their fields, possibly quite young, meeting people who are very established and can share experience. So there's 4 Kickstart projects which illustrate this idea of the audacious projects. They've all got wonderful names. So you've got MCI Biome, which is the relationship between the socioeconomic status and the gut microbiome as a risk for dementia. So this is a very important collaboration between a sociologist, a biologist, and a medicine fellow. And it's very much about looking at the intersection between social aspects, social habits, and medicine and the body. DSC Well, Data Science and the Economics of Well-Being, is basically what makes you happy. But it's a collaboration between an economist and a physics specialist. Lawyers, Law and AI, ways to explore robust solutions, and a collaboration between a lawyer and a computer scientist. And then LuxTime, which is the Luxembourg Time Machine, which is a collaboration between a historian, a biologist, and a water science specialist. And I have to say, I was saying to Laurent earlier, I did actually look up this project a little while ago, and I've totally forgotten what you're meant to be doing if you're a historian who talks to a biologist and a water person. But what I can say is that actually a lot of the people who are on this list have also been heavily involved in responding to COVID and dealing with the COVID crisis and using their science expertise and their knowledge in different ways, exploring the economics and the psychological effects of COVID, exploring obviously the medicine of COVID, and actually water as well, exploring what happens to that virus when it gets into water supplies. All of those things show how lively and important this research is. So let's get on to the pandemic, because this is also, I didn't want to end with the pandemic, we might as well. We've supported the country in containing the pandemic. It's been one of the first gestures that the rector made was to state that the university was at the service of the country and that we had to respond. So co-creation, co-coordination of the Research Luxembourg COVID-19 task force, the point of contact between the national research ecosystem, the clinical community and the authorities to foster common projects. So the work package is a posh word for a project. Okay, it's just another, I'm sorry about the academic terminology I use sometimes. So they include a cross-sectional study on infection prevalence in Luxembourg, predictive markers for COVID-19 severity, statistical pandemic predictions, gauging the economic impact of the COVID-19 outbreak, supply chains and logistics, mobilizing volunteers for support of hospitals, that was especially students doing logistics, and I can add others, psychological support, for example, and so on. 50 ongoing COVID-19 research projects at the university. As you know, the FNR actually launched some very targeted funding in order to be able to help the research at that crucial moment when we knew it was coming. And we had to be ready, and we had to be ready to respond. In medicine, my colleague Gilbert Massard, who is founding the medicine bachelor, has had a very long collaboration with one of the hospitals in Wuhan, and he held a webinar live with colleagues in Wuhan in one of the hospitals, where they were basically between two hospitals sharing what they could see in Luxembourg in terms of symptoms and saying, you know, what's your experience of this? And it was, you know, enormously important. It also tells us how important digitization is, that you can have a live webinar of this sort. Psychological counselling for staff and students online, which I was involved in helping to set up the online aspect of it, which was done incredibly quickly. Again, very efficiently, and of course financial support for students in need, because many students actually lost their jobs and found themselves in distress, could not return home because of closed borders, and therefore there was an enormous effort to help, and an enormously generous effort actually as well from public sponsors. And that brings us slightly sadly, and there is life beyond COVID, I'm sure there is, but to the end. And therefore, I hope you've enjoyed this talk. I'm very, very happy to answer any questions you may have. And something exciting is about to happen involving a little UFO.
It's actually a microphone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So, we have questions online, which Lauren will mediate, and from the audience. So I will bring the microphone to you so that you can be heard online. Questions?
Nicholas Forward. I have a question about how the UK's leaving the EU has affected the Erasmus programme, and what, if anything, you've been able to put in its place, just to see how the links between your university and the UK universities are working.
I had a rather strange experience of having been on the other side of the mirror before I arrived here. In other words, I was the head of a department that was busily renegotiating all of its Erasmus exchanges and non-Erasmus exchanges with the EU, and also dealing with a context in which universities in the UK in some cases felt it was extremely difficult to even be able to guarantee their students going out that they wouldn't suddenly find themselves in difficulty. So when I came here, it was very much, right, what's happening on this side? As you can imagine here, things have been extremely dynamic and proactive, but also there was a reluctance to let go of those exchanges, which is enormously important and absolutely crucial for many UK universities to know that there's that trust. You know, that there's that sense of actually we can continue. We send students to the States, we send students to Japan. There is no reason not to send students to Britain, was very much the message. Also, of course, you may know that there's a centre in Luxembourgish studies in Sheffield, which means that actually there are contacts we can build on. And from that point of view, there is, of course, an impact. Parents don't necessarily want to commit themselves either for a mobility, especially when, you know, we weren't sure about dates or whatever. There are existing good exchanges with universities in Ireland, and therefore it was about saying to those students, you can go to Ireland instead. But also we have a global exchange partnerships, which means that students regularly go to Australia, or to North America. And therefore it's that idea of moving into the English-speaking world, but not going necessarily to the UK. Obviously, Scotland retains an appeal for other reasons. And if you go as a free mover until this year, you could go to Scotland. Obviously, everything's been scrambled by COVID, that all the arrangements that were going to be in place for this last semester suddenly got changed, not in anticipation of Brexit, but in anticipation of COVID, because we were going to send them out from mid-February. And, you know, but yeah, there's a tremendous energy and commitment to continuing those exchanges, and it's not impossible. It's absolutely fine.
Questions? In the back there.
Hello, Louise Benjamin. We had a former au pair that was meant to start your medicine course this September.
Yes.
And she pulled out, I think, only the day before she should come because she didn't think her French was good enough. She was a perfect German and English speaker.
Yes.
Do you think you're going to lose students, good students, because you're asking too much with the languages?
That's a very, very good point.
And also you said that you need to speak French and German to live here, but you don't. I mean, you need one, you did French, I think you need, but I don't know.
I think it depends what you do.
What you do, it depends what you do, exactly.
Yes. Can I ask a question? I'm not going to go into any, did she have to do both exams? Because there's the French language exam and the German language exam for admission to the
She was a
medicine.
native German speaker.
So she didn't need to do, so did she pass the?
She passed the French exam.
She passed the French, but she felt that she
But I
wasn't
know that
good
when
enough,
she was
yeah.
an au pair with us the year before, she didn't really speak any French. I mean, hardly.
Sure.
So she was worried about that, and she dropped out literally the day before, which I thought was a shame.
I think it's a shame. I
She
think
can only do nursing now. Well, it's great she can do nursing, but she can't do medicine. So
that was her. I'm not going to talk about individuals because obviously that was actually her decision, and it also means that she's still got a place. And if she wanted to go back, then obviously she could ask again for next year. It's a very popular course though, but they might either put her through the whole admissions all over again, or they might say, you know, two things. The reason why they insist on both languages for the Bachelor in Medicine is because they're going to be doing all of their practice in Luxembourg. And consider what the average patient is like. There is no average Luxembourger, but if you're dealing with very elderly people, you do need to have the language skills to be able to deal with somebody who will speak all three languages, but may not be comfortable with English. And then you've got to have language skills that are also very strong in Luxembourg, such as Portuguese. And within that, therefore, somebody who's studying medicine is actually for the moment being put through tougher requirements than, for example, for the bachelor in, I don't know, I was about to say English, but obviously not, for the bachelor in history, for example. But if I can give you an example, which is the bachelor in psychology, the bachelor in psychology here is taught predominantly in German. And that's because it reflects the skills of the lecturers who predominantly worked or been trained in Germany, but also it reflects the intake of students and also their destinations. But when those students do their practice, they are going to be doing their practice in Luxembourg. Therefore, they need some French. They obviously need Luxembourgish, and they also need a language which is very widely spoken, such as Portuguese, to be able to connect with the patient. So it depends, you know. Some subjects are a bit more relaxed about language requirements than others, but you know, another one which is very important is the bachelor en droit, because Luxembourgish law is written in French, and therefore the degree attracts a lot of students from the French-speaking borders. But criminology records, crime records are in German, which means that if you want to take your studies further, you need both French and German, because if you want to become a criminologist or a barrister here, you need both languages. Laurent, being an expert, would you need Luxembourgish as well?
Possibly.
Yeah, I would say almost certainly in a police station. And yeah, but yes, you can get by just with English, for example, in this country, but you can't get by beyond a certain point. And if you're going to be studying and putting yourself into the Luxembourgish job market, as you know, very often the language skills are the deal breaker. And therefore that's very important as well. Does that answer your question? Thank you.
Got anything online? Okay.
Oh, do I have to read this?
I'll read this question out. It's from Graham Jarvis. Sheffield University is the only university offering a course in Luxembourgish studies. In May, Sheffield University did an online Luxembourg Studies colloquium, Luxembourg Through the Looking Glass. The keynote lecture was by Associate Professor Jean Glazner,
Jean Glazner, yeah.
Jean Glazner, University of Luxembourg. How do you see the relationship with the Sheffield expanding?
I haven't actually looked into expanding that relationship yet. What I would say, though, is that it's immensely important that that centre exists. The fact that there's that connection, that there was the conference with somebody from this university there, is also symbolically extremely important. What I would see is developing that relationship by shared research projects, and the ideal option is to have a shared master's course or a shared doctorate. That's not impossible, it's not inconceivable. We actually do have quite a few master's courses which we share with universities in other countries, and not just within the EU or the Grande Région, but actually Canada, for example. So that's how I would see that relationship expanding. It's always going to be a bit small, but Spanish has a very, very thriving French department, I think. German, never bothered with Spanish, I don't think, for some reason. It's very odd. But it's an extremely good university as well. So, yeah.
I can say, as a member of the Council of the Luxembourg Society in London, I suppose we ought to be looking into that too.
I definitely would say that, yeah.
More questions?
Yeah.
John.
The university has some splendid buildings, including the sumptuous library that was opened a couple of years ago. Are there any sort of exciting new projects on the building side?
Yeah, there should be. Obviously, when I say there should be, there should have been, in the sense that the library, the Luxembourg Learning Centre, was opened in 2018. And when I arrived, it had been running for a year. So they were reaching the stage of what in French was domesticating the building, actually getting used to it, getting used to how it worked and everything else. We could see how the users were interacting with it. One of the great strengths of the Learning Centre as well is that it attracts the local community, and therefore there's a very, very strong connection with the local community. The building is an amazing building which actually has preserved aspects of the steelworks. Actually, that's another link for Sheffield, isn't it? That's probably why it was created in the first place. There's actually remnants of the steelworks actually in there, which means you sometimes get visits by elderly people who are actually people who worked in the steelworks, and it preserves that really strong connection with the local community. Now, obviously, COVID was a dramatic and I'm afraid, very sad moment where I was actually literally walking around the building as we were deciding at what stage do we close it. And we had to close it, that afternoon, for Monday. Reopening it has been partial. We had to privilege students and researchers over the local community, but that's the next stage, is to start reopening it fully. And one of the things I would say as well is there's an enormous amount of enthusiasm for Saturday opening, which was brought in last year, and the next stage was going to be Sunday opening, which would be very unusual within Luxembourg to actually have something like a major, it's the second biggest library in the country, open on Sundays would be a really big change. One of the most interesting aspects of it as well is that it's the local school children go there a lot, which initially was perceived with a slight irritation, but I think it's fantastic. I can't get my kids into a library. The fact is they love the libraries here, and that is so important as somebody like me who likes books, especially old ones, to actually keep that connection with libraries is crucially important, because as you know, libraries are crucial for social justice as well. They actually offer access which is otherwise denied to knowledge, and that's important. Does that answer your question, or?
Half answered it, I suppose.
Okay.
Are there sort of new plans for, I don't know, student accommodation blocks, or is there a sort of a building programme which will further develop the site?
That is in the hands of a number of other stakeholders, and we are certainly, Laurent is certainly very often in discussion about developing student accommodation. What we want is more student accommodation on the Belleval site, and actually that's a shared wish also of the people who run the Belleval site, that they want that as well. They want more life on campus, but especially you need to bring people on campus 24/7, not just have them turning up and then leaving again. So yeah, there are plans in that direction. Nothing can be said, but yeah, there are plans.
Maybe also plans in Kickstart
Yes.
to rebuild the campus. So there will be a new auditorium with our Kennedy, and also the campus, our campus in Kickstart, so it's now in the plans.
Yes.
To rebuild it.
And that's going to be rebuilt in the next 5 years, but the big auditorium will be there well before. Yeah.
And also in Belvoir, there's other building projects in the pipeline still, so there's car parks that will be built up.
And I'm pushing for student accommodation in Kirchberg as well. Yeah. Yes.
One more question.
I read in, I think, the Luxembourg Times a few months ago that, so I'm an ex-Newnham girl, art history, and of course we hear about technology, digitization, and I'm saying, yeah, what about the arts?
Yes.
But I read with fascination that you had a connection between business studies and art.
Yeah.
And I did write to one of your colleagues, and I got a brief answer, but I lost the connection. SMU in Dallas was one of the first universities with the University of Bologna about 5 years ago to set up a master's degree combining art and a master in business studies, which I thought was an excellent idea, because Luxembourg does support art in a large way. And I was just wondering if that actual enterprise at the university was still going on.
There was a one-off, which I think lasted only 1 year or perhaps less than that, which was to have it was actually a certificate, so it's a very short course in investing in art. And that was an offshoot of the Masters in Wealth Management. Now, the Masters in Wealth Management is very successful. It was actually developed by the same people, but they would have this beginning by, and they would start working in that direction through that certificate in investing in art. It remained very small. There were some practical aspects of it. So it's still something that's under development, and it's still something that's, my personal contribution to this is that actually I would really love to see this kind of work happen, because I don't think we've even got an inventory of the works of art in the university. And, apparently somebody started many years ago and then they gave up. And I think seeing how much some of the local big institutions have put into this, like I went on the tour of the European Court of Justice's art collection, and the fact that they receive loans from some major museums and have artwork there, and it's regarded as an important part of the working environment. I think it would be a really nice way of connecting. I mean, there's close links, but informal ones with the MUDAM between various people in the university. I think as you say, I think it would be a very, very easy next step, and but it's an important next step which needs to be, pushed. But yeah.
Should we call it a day?
I think so. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Well, Catherine, very much. What a splendid presentation, and what a great venture Luxembourg University is. And we're all very grateful to you, and I've enjoyed the talk very much. Thank you very much, Catherine. And just finally, thank you to His Excellency John Marshall, the British Ambassador, for hosting this event. Thank you.
Thank you.